Thank you very much, Mr. Tsotsi. Mr. Swart.
Chairperson, thank you. And I just want to commend you, Mr. Tsotsi, for your courage, your resilience, for coming in today. And I appreciate that you are a praying man and that the truth will prevail. You said earlier, we pray and we trust that the truth will prevail, and we are seeing that in what you are sharing with us today. I wanted to ask you, I see you are not represented with lawyers like our other witnesses have been. Were you offered legal assistance at all? And you indicated that there's some outstanding legal account that still has to be paid.
Yes, I'm glad you raised that matter. I did have legal representation, and I do. And I was meant to come here with the team. But unfortunately, there was some misunderstanding. Because yesterday morning, before I was coming this way, our team had a conversation with the management team for this committee. I think there was, the impression that our people had was that we would not be permitted to sit inside. They could be here, but they would not be permitted to participate. But I think what was meant, what I understood this morning from Sang, is that what was meant was that the lawyers would not be able to speak on behalf of the witness, but rather they would be available to assist the witness at the hearing.
And do you feel any way disadvantaged by not having them here today?
To some degree, yes, I do. I do. The other question which you asked, and I'm happy that Mr. Khoza, the chief executive, or the current, and the chief executive, I understand, acting, as well as Mr. Khoza, the acting chairperson of Eskom, is here. That at the time of my dispute with the board at Eskom, just before I left, there was a very clear commitment, and at the time, Mr. Khoza was member of that board, so he would recall exactly what I'm talking about. There was a commitment from the board and an agreement by the board that they would pay my legal fees for the issue that was at hand at the time. And as I said, those legal fees are still outstanding up to today.
Have you felt intimidated at all by any persons? You indicated that, I think someone indicated that you are unemployed at the moment because of a stance that you've taken.
I've not felt intimidated as such, but clearly I am aware that generally institutions that I would ordinarily have some relations with seem to shy away from dealing with me. So I am aware that it is because of what transpired at Eskom, and that nobody is certain of where I stand, so to speak, and so on. So people are reluctant to want to deal with a situation like that.
You're not the first witness to indicate that. We've had previous witnesses as well, and the call from this committee has been to corporate South Africa to look favorably upon such candidates that are prepared to take a stand for what is just and right as we evaluate the evidence that you have presented to us. You indicated that there's a hidden hand here, and maybe it's not so hidden, it's very clear. You indicated the freight train, it's not a hidden hand, it's a freight train. It's not a coal train, it's a freight train. It's very clearly from your evidence that it is the Guptas, Mr. Salim Essa, aided and abetted by Minister Brown and uBaba President Zuma. That is your evidence, it's direct evidence. Would you be in agreement with that?
I don't think the evidence is direct. Maybe I think that's maybe overstating it. But if you want to connect the dots, I think you're welcome to do that. And my job is just to expose my experiences, and then I'll leave the deductions to yourselves.
Thank you. One of the, and it might be useful to have a look at, have you had a look at this little booklet that is presented by the academics that sketches, it connects the dots all the way. Have you had an opportunity to study this booklet at all?
That Anton Eberhard's document?
That's correct, yes.
I've actually had discussions with Anton before he wrote. He asked me to contribute towards that document, so
and does that I'm so sorry, my time is very limited. I don't want to be rude, but does that not, in your view, connect the dots to a large degree?
Well, I think he's done a job that is very useful, and it gives us a certain level of analytical base on which to try and understand what's going on.
You've just said now you wonder that your, I think you used that your situation was clearly orchestrated. And one can see that is part of the connecting of the dots. You see a new board is appointed. You see almost every member of that board has links to the Gupta family and Mr. Issa. You see immediately thereafter, you see the meeting that you are called to discuss the suspension of the executives. That takes place. The financial director is then also added. She who stood against, that's Ms. Molefe, she who stood against the TNA and wouldn't sign that TNA agreement. You can clearly see a pattern that is orchestrated to rid the board of those that would be seen as obstacles. Would you be in agreement with that to a certain degree?
I would say that, you know, if I tally my experience with some of the things that are happening, that clearly the people who were batting for the organization were having difficulty because their views were constantly being challenged, and their authority was constantly being challenged. And one felt that the pressure they were being put under has to have come from somewhere.
Correct. And of course, the TNA contract, the extension of that, was clearly to benefit a Gupta-related company. And once it had been signed and the financial director refused to sign it, and it resulted in an irregular and wasteful expenditure audit query, that is surely also in breach of the Public Finance Management Act as well, the role that Mr. Kolomachila played in that regard. Would you in agreement with that?
I certainly would agree. I think that in my statement I do make the point that to the extent that we accepted, you know, the finding as well as the corroboration by the legal firm that yes, he was indeed in breach and that should never have happened.
The meeting very briefly with Ms. Dudi Murieni and the President, where you are introduced to Mr. Linnell, and it seems to me you've been very gracious, but it seems to me you got direct instructions that this was what was going to happen. The next day, when you go to the board meeting, you take Mr. Linnell with you, and that in itself would appear to be a breach of procurement processes. And if I remember correctly, the board member said, but who is this person? There's been no procurement process to appoint him to do this job. Would that be correct as well?
Well, there's a bit of a missing link there. The reason why I asked Nick to come was so he could speak to the resolution document that he had prepared. And I said to the board that the board should consider engaging him in this exercise.
So then the
board then agreed that yes, Mr. Linnell will then work with the Audit and Risk Committee to assist us. But what did not happen was a formal engagement of Mr. Linnell either through a contract or whatever the case was. But the principle of having him assist the board was accepted by the board.
I understand.
And this is one of the reasons that the board gave that I supposedly breached, as you were suggesting, the requirement and imposed Mr. Linnell on the board, which in fact was not the case.
I understand. Thank you. That was the meeting of the 11th of March. And just to add to connecting the dots, we now have the evidence, and one of the questions that was put to you related to whether management had links with the Guptas or with any other related person. Now we have evidence from Ms. Daniels that she and the head of generation, who's obviously a very important person, Mr. Machila Koko, were summoned or went to see Mr. Salim Essa 2 days before the meeting on the 11th of March. 2 days. That was on the 9th of March. They were then advised that there would be suspensions and that those executives would be suspended by Mr. Salim Essa. So that's why I say the hand is not hidden. It's very clear. That is the same person that you say in your testimony gave you a list of the board subcommittee members. This is obviously, and that is how it transpired. That's exactly how it transpired. That information was in the hands of Mr. Salim Issa 2 days before the meeting. It was in the hands of President Zuma a while before, and of course it was in the hands of Minister Brown, who was at the meeting. So you can connect the dots very easily. Would you agree with that?
I, in fact, was not aware of that aspect of Susan Daniels' submission. It doesn't surprise me. And this is the point that I was trying to make earlier, that, you know, when you work with situations, your gut feeling tells you that there's more to it than meets the eye. And these are the sorts of things that are now beginning to emerge to corroborate precisely what we're talking about.
You've been very helpful in helping us with direct evidence. And one of the issues, the examples that you gave of doing things for Mr. Tony Gupta, you gave an example about the gas to the Western Cape. And he said to you that we are dealing with uBaba's enemies. Those are the words that I wrote down. What on earth could that mean in your understanding?
What I understood him to be saying is that we are assisting someone to access this gas business in the Western Cape, who in fact is an enemy of Baba.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My time is very limited.
So in that instance, effectively, he's saying, we are working against Baba. That's basically where he's getting at. That's intimidation tactic that was at play there.
Surely it related also to a market competitor to Mr. Tony Gupta himself. Is that not actually what it was? A market competitor, because he was competing in the same space and was then upset that there was already a memorandum of understanding. Would you agree with that? That was a market competitor to Mr. Tony Gupta.
That would be
And
correct,
so therefore, an enemy of President Zuma would be or an enemy of Tony Gupta would be an enemy of the president. He would spin it in that way to bring the president in to possibly intimidate you.
I think that's a fair conclusion to reach.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And so you also referred to the Gupta emails. Have you read the Public Protector's report?
That's one of the documents that I requested from Eskom and did not get. I have read the sanitized version that I got from through my own resources. But of course, it was full of blank pages.
I'm sorry, I think you're referring to the Denton's report. Are you referring?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the Denton's, was correct, no. I've only seen snippets of the Public Protector's report. I've only perused through it, but I have not actually read the whole report.
The reason I asked you, because you indicated this freight train that was coming. And so if you read the Public Protector's report and its observances, that we had a long debate with Mr. Molefe about whether it's findings or not, but it very clearly articulates a process by which the board cooperated and benefited together to purchase Optimum, and that in itself is set out very clearly, and that would seem to be the part of the end game of this whole process. Appoint a board, remove some of the executives, particularly your financial director, your CEO, bring in new people such as Mr. Molefe, who on his version did exceptionally good work with load shedding, but at the same time, him and Mr. Anoj Singh facilitated a major coal contract for the Gupta-related Oak Bays. You can see the end game very clearly. Would you agree with that?
Well, the totality of the picture and what emerges out of it, you know, is a matter that gives one the view that all of these things are related.
Yes, and so that is part of what we're trying to establish with this oversight inquiry, and that's why we've given and will be given witnesses to come and testify. But what you have given us a link today is a very clear link with Mr. Salim Issa, the Gupta family, and you said in terms that there is clear collusion between Minister Brown and the Guptas. So I am grateful for that evidence that you presented today. Thank you, Chair. I'm 16 seconds over my time.
Thank you, Mr. Swart. According to my watch, you are 17 seconds over your time.